Leif Jackson here, VP of Content and Community over at Cybrary. Excited to have Stephen Boughner here, partner at NISP IP Law, and Vishal Gupta, CTO and SVP of Unisys. Thank you guys for coming today. We'll talk a little bit about AI, machine learning, big data, some of the trends, some of the skill sets you should be building in the space, and then talk a little bit about security within that space and enablement of your security teams.
Thanks. So I got in the AI space actually 25 years back. When I came to the US, Dartmouth funded my thesis, and it was funded by US Air Force, where I actually had created a search engine using neural networks and singular value decomposition. At that time, it was not really called AI, it was just called machine learning only, and I didn't realize this was an important thing until Google started their search engine, and I realized, oops, what did I do? So my journey was in AI was more by an accident, though I've really had fun since then.
For myself, I'm a patent attorney, and so typically it's all dependent upon the company I work for and what technologies they're working on and what the inventors for the company are creating. And in the last 4 years, the company that I do a lot of work for, they've focused on AI and, of course, neural networks, whether it's from consumer products or particular functionalities, or for the actual internal operation neural networks. So actually for mine, I've actually only been working on them for a few years, but it's in my responsibility at our law firm, it's to make sure that all the other associates understand the technology. So I've really had to ramp up and understand this technology substantially more than maybe someone usually would have had to in a short period of time.
That's awesome. So can you talk to me about what you guys are doing today?
Sure. So, I joined Unisys about a year back, and I think one of the things that excited me to join Unisys was there was a huge opportunity to transform our technology products, our service platforms, and I thought AI would be a great enabling technology to do that. And so I'm lucky to have a significant team of several thousand engineers all across the globe in sort of 6 delivery centers all over the globe. And I've had the opportunity. We were not doing any AI in our products before I joined, but since then, we built a very strong competence, and we already now have 2 products that leverage AI. And in another 6 months, we'll have 3 more. So we'll actually have 5 products using AI. So it's been an interesting journey. And prior to that, I was at Symantec, and Symantec in cybersecurity is a big user of AI because cybersecurity is a difficult problem to solve otherwise. So I've had interesting blushes with AI or different domains.
I think that actually leads me into my next question. So how is AI and machine learning affecting cybersecurity today? So a lot of our audience, obviously, we have 2.5 million users across the world, largely in the cybersecurity and IT space. How would you say it's improving operations, detection, across the board?
When you think about cybersecurity, you really have to think about the entire life cycle of cybersecurity, right from how do you detect, how do you protect, how do you predict, how do you plan. So when you think about that entire life cycle of cybersecurity and you think about that for your entire digital landscape, which means you're thinking about, things like cloud, you're thinking about your servers, you're thinking about your mobile devices, your desktops that you're using, you can understand it's a very complex problem because the IT landscape is so complex and so disaggregated, right? You've got all kinds of network devices, things are connected, and it's complex also because you've got now NIST tracks number of vulnerabilities. There are now up to 110,000. In fact, NIST is based in Maryland itself, right? And every employee has become a vulnerability itself because people's credentials can get easily stolen because people use the same credentials in consumer sites as they end up using within the company. And so this problem has become very complex, and this is the reason why companies have started to apply, whether we think about the companies in the DC metro area, and there's a number of cybersecurity companies based here, or across the US in general, they've started to apply AI in many different ways. Some of the three big ways that I have seen application of AI, both at Symantec and at Unisys, has been one, in the threat detection space. Because when you think about detecting a threat, there is two things that you have to do. You have to map, you have to sort of figure out, is there an indicator of compromise, which means is there a certain malware signature that I can map to? And AI is very good at pattern recognition. So you don't have to have an exact match. It can match a particular pattern. And that's what typically unstructured learning does. The second piece that AI can be very good at, where it is used, is detecting if there is something different going on. So because this problem space is so complex, one of the things that AI provides is called anomaly detection. And so the idea is if people start to, let's say you've got an employee who has never accessed source code and suddenly starts accessing source code, it's an anomaly. And maybe it's okay, but 99% there's something perhaps fishy going on. And so AI is also very good at figuring out what's normal, what's abnormal, and having that with a level of confidence. So these two areas are very common. The third area that AI is starting to get used a lot in cybersecurity is really around simplification. Because cyber is very complex, people end up even having cyber products but not deploying them in the right way, not integrating them in the right way. So, for example, we recently added AI in our product called Stealth because we want the cyber product to almost tell the customer how they should be configuring them, how the policies should be, instead of the customer having the expertise to put those policies in. And so combination of detecting the threat, of being able to simplify the policies, of being able to detect an abnormal behavior, and then finally also assisting the humans who are working in cybersecurity, who are the SOC analysts, with a variety of figuring out which things are important to go after versus which ones are not. So these 3 or 4 use cases are big for AI in cybersecurity.
Are they using AI much for just the straight automation? Because it's like if you detect a threat and then maybe it's interpreting that there might be a threat, or that someone seems to be probing. Is there any automation going on right now with AI for that?
Yeah, so I think actually that's a great question. Thanks for asking that. So there is a big field in cyber called SOAR, Security, Operations, and Orchestration and Response. And what SOAR intends, and this is one of the companies that Palo Alto had recently bought called Demisto for almost $450 million. And what SOAR intends is to really integrate a lot of these pieces together so that way you can orchestrate a response. In the past, they have been silos. And so where AI comes to play is, you can do automation even without AI, but where AI comes to in play is intelligent automation. So instead of saying always if something happens, this is the thing to do, AI can help things be a little more unstructured, so it can almost recommend kind of what to do and almost do it for you. So you can set up very interesting rules that can help AI, automatically say, if you detect this pattern, maybe you should download this type of software and close these ports, or perhaps isolate this user. So these are definitely some very upcoming examples of AI where it's getting used mixed by RPA, which is robotic process automation, together with pattern recognition to do what AI can do, which is intelligent automation.
Very interesting. What would you say the kind of the critical skills are for people in AI machine learning nowadays? And how have those changed over the years? And how do you think they're going to change in the future?
I've actually seen a lot of change in terms of skill sets for AI because in the past, everything was based on people really knowing mathematics to a very large extent. And I think if you want to be a data scientist, that's still an important thing because you need to know the algorithms. But what cloud has done, so if you think about Google with TensorFlow, Azure with all of the AI capabilities they've brought on, AWS with SageMaker, these companies have democratized the use of AI. They have made the use of AI much more simpler, where people who do not have that PhD, who don't have that deep maths background, can still figure out based upon identifying the business use case, which is the right problem to attack, and then the tools will recommend the type of algorithms to apply. And they will obviously leverage the data that the company will have, and sometimes they can even add some synthetic data to it. And so I think if you look at the skill set that you need today for AI, it's definitely you do need some level of programming like a Python. You need some level of maths, so that way you don't need a deep maths background, but you need some level of maths background. But then what I find people to be most useful is when they can understand those business use cases. They can say, okay, does this problem fit in AI? Number one. Number two, which algorithm type of problem it is. And so I think that is causing much widespread use of AI, where now it's becoming almost like a de facto in every product versus having to be something that's very, very specialized.
Do you find that helpful to have like a specialized employee base for the determination of the data, or what data to collect for the AI, or?
Yeah, so I think maybe one of the things that companies can do, and we tried doing this at Unisys, is I wanted all my engineers to have what I would call as a level 1 type of understanding of AI, because I want all engineers to know, do I have a use case where AI might be useful? So I want them to know the lingo. I want them to know, hey, when should I be using classification types of things versus neural networks? When, what type of problem statements would there be? What type of data sets do I need? And then I think you need a small set of data scientists who are very specialized, but they themselves are really needed just to build that machine learning model and not necessarily do all the programming. Your developers can still do the programming. And so I think a combination approach where you have people who have a broader set of knowledge, and then a narrower set of people who have very deep knowledge in actually saying, is this model valid, right? Is the error rate okay, right? Is it worth using this model, or am I just fooling myself? That, I think, is a good approach of bringing two sets of talents together, and that way you have a much more scalable model. The other approach may also be that now there's lots of specialized companies. The VCs have funded literally thousands of companies who have either taken a narrow functional approach. They'll say, I will solve the problem for recruiting with AI. And then, so they can bring that expertise if you don't have it yourself. Does that address your question?
Yeah, I guess one thing we had talked maybe a month ago, and we'd also talked maybe a little bit like small businesses or small companies, the startups, and kind of like, I guess there was a concern versus large companies that have the capability to collect their data as it already exists and just kind of collate it or to organize it, and smaller companies that are just starting out and collecting data. And I guess the conversation we kind of had was, if you're a small company, you just keep collecting as much data as possible. And I guess, it's not my specialty in this part of the AI, but it's, from my understanding, it's kind of also one of those things where it's be a little proactive. And if you can, you essentially create the app or create the product that if the people give the information, it improves the product, which also gives you more data, which maybe you can expand your data, and then later on you'll determine that you can do other products and so forth.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So, if I think about, there's a lot of success we see with small technology companies. Now, how were they able to beat big companies like Symantec? For example, we recently saw CrowdStrike go to public, right? And they started from scratch. They were a startup, and just in one area they have, really excelled, which is obviously the endpoint detection and response. And their market cap is now $14 billion. And so one of the very transformational things that cloud has done is, if your platform is running on cloud, your ability to collect that data is much more easy, right? So instead of creating very sophisticated telemetry that we had to create in the past, that would kind of call home and send the data from where the customer is deployed, if you are an application that's being natively built on the cloud, it'll give you built-in capabilities as the customer is using it to collect the data. And so I think what is needed is, even if you're a small company, As long as you educate your people about, hey, data is the new gold, this is the differentiation. We want to collect the data about every experience the customer has, about every employee experience, about, because how do you differentiate now? You differentiate based on experience. You need great people. You want to give them a great experience. So you collect, the data on the employees. You collect the data on the partners, on the customer. If these things are running on the cloud, then I think it gives you, irrespective of your scale, much easier way to collect and massage and analyze that data than you ever had before. So I feel the field has become much more level playing than before. Now, we have ourselves seen many cases where we didn't have the data. We had to recently create an AI project for border crossing. We didn't have the data for that particular country, so we had to take the data from another country. In this case, we took the data from US, because we had that data for many, many years to be able to predict for another country, what patterns might happen. So sometimes you can leverage a data from a different problem or a different region to predict. Sometimes you can also create synthetic data, meaning if you have certain patterns, you can almost create the data, which we do in case of biometrics, to almost predict, because it's hard to buy 100 million biometric samples to train. So there are, I think, many techniques. You still need data, but I think by leveraging public data sources, by leveraging cloud, by leveraging the ability to even use synthetic data, perhaps data from other use cases, I think the problem for smaller companies is a very solvable problem, and we're already seeing great success in AI by small technology companies.
I think so. One thing interesting, from in my field, is as AI becomes more prevalent, or not prevalent, but more like it's spread out. There's more and more technologies, whether it's agriculture or whether it's robotics, control systems, or your face recognition or speech recognition, or who knows, or cybersecurity. It's as the underlying engineering and the technology understanding, for example, automobiles, you still need to have sometimes, at least in my field, for a patent, or to someone who has the engineering background to understand how that AI fits in. And so it's like a little similar where you have the AI person who you want him to know the basic level. It's kind of one of those things that we need to get my people to understand the basic level also for AI.
Right.
So they understand when they get AI that it's unique in this situation and why it makes this application more special than just a plain old controller.
Yeah, I almost feel this AI discussion is a bit similar to, in 99 we used to say if you were not on the web, you would become irrelevant, right? And so nobody really knew how to use HTML, how to create a website, or a domain name, all the things we take for granted, right? We feel like the world has moved, but that time, that was a differentiator. So I feel like we're at that crossroads again, right? That, hey, if you are not going to be using AI, you're going to become irrelevant because, to your point, it's actually has so many applications in anything you do, right? It can use to make it simple, cheaper, and better.
And it's also interesting because it's like we have data here. The concern a couple years ago was too many big companies have all the data, or maybe one country has so much data so they're ahead of us. It's now there's this big advertisement of a push of 5G and IoT. And as we have more sensors and more data, and essentially everything, maybe in 5 years, might be connectable to some type of wireless network. And as long as security is there, they will be able to share data. And so I wonder if there's going to be substantially more public data in the future. And now we have data, but now the concern in the future will be, how do you use all the extra data around you? And, it'll be like another.
I think that's a great point. I think almost governments, just like in healthcare, will have some role to play. So in the past, the government ended up creating a level playing field by saying, I'm going to have a bank that can lend to also poor people. So I almost expect now governments, and US does that to some extent, all countries don't do. They actually make available for free. Like you can go to NIH and get any data source you want, provided you can show them why you need it, right? They'll obviously give you in with limited ways. So I do think the point that you're raising is a very valid point that, this will be one of the areas where I think even the government can start to play a role to say, okay, just like China is really trying to invest in to say how can they be ahead of AI, as we think about US, as we think about some countries in Europe, right, where the government will create a set of data with a set of safeguards to make sure that their industry has a level playing field compared to other companies, so they can continue to innovate, continue to operate, at the same time protect the privacy of where the data came from.
And I think we were
the
going to
anonymization, I think, will be important.
I think we were going to talk a little bit about that. I think you went to
Oh
bring up.
yeah. It sounds like the new world of ownership data is king, right? It's gold, right? So we hear a lot about how to value data and information and how to utilize it in different ways, but really it's like how to secure it. And so what we hear from a lot of companies nowadays is they're trying to enable their entire enterprise to secure their data, right? As well as utilize it. So could you guys talk a little bit about that? How your companies are securing your data and enabling your companies to be able to utilize it?
So, when you think about data, there's three things you have to think about. One, you have to think about how do you encrypt the data that a particular device or a machine has. That's typically called data at rest, and it's around encrypting it so that way if somebody breaks into the device, the data does not get lost, right? As we know, companies like Equifax perhaps didn't do that as much, so that way all the data got out. The second thing you have to do is to encrypt data in motion. So that way, as the data is getting transmitted between the company and the cloud, between different parts of the company and a supplier, if somebody gets a man-in-the-middle attack, you don't want the data to be compromised. Right. And so if that data is encrypted with the right type of encryption that people can break, typically like a 256-bit AES, then that itself is the second fact. The third thing you have to think about is data classification. So if you think about requirements like GDPR, right? If the data is a sensitive data, which can identify a person, it's called private data in the US, then you can actually get a fine of 4% of revenue or 20 million, right, whatever is more. And so you need to know if you're not going to, some companies can say, I'm going to encrypt everything, but that can slow things down.
Sure.
So instead you can say, okay, if I have a data classification, I'll know if this data is sensitive. If the data is sensitive, I'll encrypt it both at rest and in motion. I'll make sure that this data is protected. If the data has private healthcare information, credit card information, can be used to personally identify somebody, we're going to provide special treatment to it through these types of means, not just in terms of encryption, but where it can be forwarded. That area is also called data loss prevention in the industry, DLP. So I think given we all know data is the king, there is now a lot of focus around encrypting it, around protecting it, around classifying it, around ensuring that it passes the different privacy hurdles so that way both from a reputational and a regulatory perspective, you're not exposed.
I guess my perspective is also from maybe a small business. And you have large corporations and they'll have well thought out procedures. And even a small company can have well thought out procedures, but a large company may have more capabilities to implement them and protect themselves. And whereas sometimes the smaller companies, they do their best, and it's interesting that it's on a different scale. So it's like whereas a small company, a small business might have just an IT specialist. That IT specialist might also he might have a backbone of help, but it's interesting because it's the level of protection sometimes is different because we try to protect, and essentially for us we have clients' data. And we really have to protect it because it's IP rights and it's patent information. And some things have not been filed in the United States, or they have not been filed somewhere else before. And so we have to keep it secret. But there's a balance also where we need to make sure employees can do their work. And right. So just like, I have my little iPad here, I'm trying to convert over to the digital world and try to kill less trees, but there's an issue where I'm taking this around, and while it requires face recognition, it does have data, and it does have access to my work email.
Right.
It does have, my goal would be to be able to VPN in to work, but that would also mean with a couple clicks, someone can immediately get into our system. But hopefully there's protections upon protection, and so it's one of the skills. It's one of the issues where it's interesting for a small company.
I think that's a great point. So I think there is two things I would say about it. One is, as you pointed out, I thought your example about how it has face recognition is very key, because we know normal name, password, credentials can be compromised very easily. And so I think there is going to be a big move towards biometrics, because we also can't keep on changing our password every 6 weeks, right? We're all sick and tired of trying to change these passwords, put all types of special characters, we forget everything, and then we try to make it the same in every site, and one of them gets compromised, and now we're more unsafe than before. So we need to bridge this gap between security and convenience. We need both. And that's where I think biometrics can play a big role. I think the second thing is that the bar is actually lower for small businesses, because the governments realize that they don't have all the resources. And that's why if you look at the GDPR fines, Facebook is getting a fine of $5 billion, but a small guy is not getting that fine, because they know that it's going to be on a best effort basis. Now, going back to my cloud theme, the nice thing is now a lot of these technologies are available through cloud. And so when you're buying, say, you're working on Office 365, Microsoft is enabling some version of DLP by default for you, just on the basic thing that you've bought. And so if you simply turn it on, you don't have to pay any money extra. At least you have some level of protection. A bigger company can obviously do much more, and they do. But I think even the small person now has a much better level playing field than they ever had before in this cloud and 5G era.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, like the board level field, because I think there was at some point in time, there's a concern of fairness and competition, where you have this huge company that has so much resources and had so many years to create this data that's so proprietary, and they have so many sources for data. And it's interesting that that as I was reading, sometimes it seems like the policymakers are almost behind the times a little bit, where you hear about a new policy of trying to level the field, maybe in this area, when you start hearing about the fact that there's more data sources that are equally valuable or that are public. And so it's interesting that the fair competition issue, it may become more minimized and less of a burden on an upstart company to compete with a large company.
I think so. I think now you're seeing more small businesses are the ones that's coming up. And if you look at the number of Fortune 500 companies, a lot of change happening, right? Since 2000, I was reading a statistic that said almost 40% of Fortune 500 companies that were then 2000 versus now have, almost 40% of them have gone through either M&A or, simply shut down, like a Xerox or a Nortel. So certainly, I think there is a lot of pressure on both sides, but we do think more small businesses are getting started than ever before. So I think certainly there is some benefits that come with size, but also there's some disadvantages that come with size as well.
And also, one thing that's interesting about that, I didn't really think about it, but I was reading up before we came here today, and one of the concerns about the data is that you have large companies merging with large companies. We used to just think about the competitive benefit they'll have in the marketplace, or the products, or the logistics will be cheaper for them. But now it's kind of potentially, what proprietary data does this company have that when merged with that proprietary data, all of a sudden makes a behemoth?
I think that's a great point, right? Now, instead of just thinking about product overlap and customer overlap and region overlap, regulators will need to think about, data overlap and, do you have too much of an unfair monopoly or advantage with one? The other thing I wanted to mention is the other move I'm seeing in the industry is, people are realizing that if a malware comes in, or say they're infected by a ransomware, that they need to keep some kind of a backup of the crown jewels. They can't necessarily back up every single thing, but they need to back up, what they believe are the crown jewels, which they don't want to get impacted by this ransomware. And so, for example, these companies like EMC have something called a cyber recovery vault. And, so people are starting to, almost like we used to have a vault where you would put all your valuables. Now you have a cyber recovery vault where you put all your really, really critical data that if, you shut down and then you have to reboot every server and destroy everything, you have something to start with. But now the hackers are so smart, they go after the cyber recovery type of things as well, which is where now we're trying to secure that using our technology, which is called stealth. So it's a little bit of a cat and mouse game, right? We're always trying to be ahead, and the hackers get ahead, and then we try to take two more steps. It's very interesting.
It's also funny because it's like if you go way back in the day with tape drives.
That's right. That's what that is.
Essentially, they would take the tape drives out and then ship them off or take it to another company who would
Iron Mountain. That's how Iron Mountain got started.
They put it underground or put it in some cave or whatever, some dry storage.
Yeah.
As a part of that, that protection of the data, making sure that you store it in the right places, making sure that you double it, right, and encrypt it. We've been working with a number of companies that build sophisticated products. One of the big problems that we see in product design is security tends to come at the end of the process rather than during the process. And it's largely because there's this security team out there that kind of looks at the product at the very end rather than is something that is infused in the actual team itself. So can you talk a little bit about how, when you're thinking about products, how security is infused throughout it?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question, Leif. So, there is two movements that are happening. One is called secure by design, and also privacy by design, because the same problem on security is also happening with privacy, where people would design the website that would take all kinds of information, and then you say, why do you really need that information, and how long are you going to keep it for? Mm-hmm. And so these two things, what companies are trying to do is, as they build products, they're trying to infuse these principles right at the design stage in terms of how do you build secure by design and privacy by design. That's one movement that's happening. The challenge is, even if you do these two principles, if I look at a company like a Netflix or one of the Silicon Valley companies, right, they're going from once a year release to a once a quarter release to once a month release to now multiple releases within a single day. And so if you take a traditional mindset of saying, I'm going to create a product, then I send the ball to the security team spends a couple weeks, and then they come back and say, you need to fix these 6 things. That model can't work if you have to do a release every day or even once a month. And so there is a new movement in the industry, and it's called DevSecOps. Mm-hmm. And the idea behind DevSecOps is your development. In the past, you had 3 teams. Developers who would develop. Then you had the guys, they would say, okay, here is the code. You guys run and operate it. And then there was a security team that you had to go before they could operate it to say, hey, do I have vulnerabilities? Now they're bringing all of these 3 teams together because they're trying to drive a lot of automation, a lot of tooling to say, all things that I'm going to deploy as microservices, as containers, are they really secure by design? Or can I check out the boxes? So instead of always going to the security team and saying, hey, can I get your permission? Security team has said, these are my set of principles. You codify these principles as automated scripts. So that way, right when you're going to be deploying things, they get automatically checked. If they're a problem, you can go and build it. If they're cleared out, then you can go and, get your releases deployed. So it's very interesting how this field has sort of, evolved from not thinking about security to thinking about security by design to not thinking about true DevSecOps.
Like for us, it's interesting because it's very small. We're a boutique and maybe like about 20 attorneys and a limited staff, but it's still we still have to have our IT people remind everyone, you don't click on things, right. Or worst case scenario, if you have to open something, take your phone out, open it on your phone. Mm-hmm. If you have to destroy,
they want your phone to be infected before the machine gets infected.
If your phone's destroyed, we can replace it.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of thing. But it's, I don't know. It's interesting because we still have to do it from that perspective. It's like the old school, but we still have to.
Yeah. No, that's true, right? I think studies show that people love to click, despite educating them as much as you want. There is some innate human curiosity that is there that makes them think that either they want something or somebody has done something really important for them. And, this area is obviously called phishing, and people love to click. And so one of the interesting technologies that I've seen is called isolation browser. And the idea is that instead of that click that you do, which runs on your machine, either on your phone or on your machine and ends up infecting that machine? What if it ran outside your machine in an isolated cloud? And that way, it could only infect that VM. So almost, outsource that whole concept of where the thing runs, because if it runs and ends up infecting, now it's something infected that we don't care about. And so this has become one of the other interesting technologies that people are adopting in a number of areas to say, okay, can I just, since people, no matter how much education campaign I run, they just keep on clicking, can I find a different way to address this problem?
I think interesting thing about phishing is kind of maybe it's like for small companies sometimes, and they're dealing with other small companies. And sometimes it's whether it's someone who spends a lot of time figuring out how to do it, or they have maybe an AI that's now better at it. They collect enough information to impersonate the other party. It's one of those things where like all of a sudden it's like man in the middle, but it's like all of a sudden someone nowadays electronically can mimic that they are someone and then potentially mimic.
Yeah,
and
people
forward it
think
on
the email is from so and so, right? Only if you actually look at the email and see the actual email address can you tell. Otherwise, it'll say, oh, it's from Apple or it's from Microsoft, and it looks very official.
Right.
So people have become very, very good, or the hackers have become very good at impersonating.
And I've actually seen somewhere or heard of somewhere like they also send like a fax, or they'll send a letter, or they'll send something to inform the law firm that they've changed their email, or that that they're having some technical difficulties. And so from this point on, they're going to use the exact same name with .net, or this name with .something. That seems perfectly legit, that you would have gotten it another time. And it's one of those things that you're kind of more like, it depends on, you have to also educate your workforce, because all of a sudden if someone just sees that and starts sending letters or emails to that account, next thing you know, you're getting, it's more than just emails. Yeah. It's other information.
Yeah, people have become very sophisticated at this is called, spear phishing, and it's all kinds of things go on.
Yeah, we have a great course on it if you guys want to check it out.
I miss the old days, like fax machines. I love those.
Absolutely. So, I mean, given all these threats out there, like, how do you maintain privacy in this new world? Like what can we do to protect ourselves?
I think there are some common sense things you can do, and there are some things that the company, whether it's big or small, will need to do. So I think as an individual, what you can do is, people care about, we recently released as Unisys something called the Security Index.
Yeah.
It showed that people have a lot of fear for their identity. They care about their identity being stolen even more than they think the fear of the terrorist attack might be, just because I think that has been countered much better over the last maybe 20 years or so. And so I think what people can do is, one, obviously, have the hygiene in terms of making sure that, they're checking somebody using their credit or something like that, right? They have some level, like now a lot of sites let you monitor your credit or your credit score. So certainly if they see somebody applying credit for them, they know there's something going on. That's what they could do for their identity. For the machines, they have to make sure they keep on with the latest updates. Like if you have a Mac, it'll tell you when the latest update is there. And in the past, people would ignore it, but now these updates end up fixing what's called patches, right? End up fixing a lot of security vulnerabilities. And so whether it's your phone or your machine, you want to make sure, whether you're using Android or Apple, that you really are taking advantage of the newer releases, and that way, you're doing things that at least you can control. The third thing you can do is to, even as an individual, back up your data, right? This would seem like very non-trivial, but even though cloud ends up backing some level of data, it's always possible that your machine may get infected, they may have to reimage it, and you might lose a significant part of the data. And these days, storage is cheap, and so as an individual, these are very simple things you could do. And the fourth thing, obviously, is your credential, right? In terms of whether, if your machine allows you the biometrics, which now Windows allows, Mac allows, can you leverage it? Can you leverage, not have the same name password every place? That's what the individuals can do. Now, at a company level, what the company can do is, there is a trend in the industry that's called zero trust. And the thought is that, in the past, we built a perimeter. Whoever was within the perimeter, we trusted, and we gave them access to everything. And clearly, it's so easy to get for hackers to come in, that model doesn't make sense. And so zero trust says, even if you're in or you're out, we don't have any trust in you. You have to validate yourself every time you want to do anything interesting. And so that's where, when you see, if you go to a banking site, you will see that if you may be able to see a balance, but if you're trying to do any transaction, it'll say, I sent you an SMS code, type that in, right? So whether you use it through a second factor authentication like that, or you ultimately use biometrics, which will be more convenient, companies have to adopt sort of a zero trust approach. The other thing companies can do is zero trust says, if you already get breached, somebody will come in. How do you minimize the impact of that breach? And so I think there's a lot of companies who want to invest not just in the protection technology, which is what people did in the past, but in what we would call as isolation technologies.
Right.
That says that very quickly, if you detect something is wrong, can you isolate that thing in 30 seconds or less? Because if you can isolate it, it will not become the source of infection for everything. Because what happens is as soon as somebody clicks on a link and a malware comes, first their machine gets infected, then their machine becomes a source for infection, for that infection to spread to the whole enterprise. So if you can stop it right in that one place, you can detect it fast and isolate it, then it will not spread, right? So it will become a non-event. So I think these things, which both the individual can do and then the company can do with a zero trust approach and things like dynamic isolation, multi-factor authentication, I think can go a long ways in solving what is a very complex problem.
Now, what kind of difference in products? I mean, for an enterprise, it's their capability to implement some enterprise level product versus maybe a company of, say, 500 employees or a company of maybe 75. Are there different types of products out there that would provide potentially something that isolation type?
Yeah, so I mean, just to maybe plug in our own product, so we make something called Stealth, and the idea is that, can you, through microsegmentation, first make sure that you can only access what makes the most sense.
Right.
And then through dynamic isolation, we can isolate you to make sure that if you somehow still get infected for whatever reason, you don't become the source of infection for everybody else. And so I think what you want to do, whether you're a small or a large company, is to buy these things, as a software, not as a hardware, because that's much more flexible. And then buy it as a subscription. So that way, if it's effective, you can use it, pay for it, but you don't have to incur a lot of cost one time and then realize it's not useful. And I think the third thing that they can look at is integration. That, you want things that integrate and work well together, right? Even though they may be coming from many different companies, because then you want ultimately a security outcome, right? Not just these things doing just their bit.
So if you were going to say, what skill sets people need to build, especially in IT, what security skill sets in specific to protect, what would you say those would be?
As AI moves along and AI becomes across many different technologies, cybersecurity will have to follow. You'll have to have some type of level for your nanny cam. You're going to have some type of protection for a controller, in an electric power plant. You're going to have anything that has an AI will have to some type of a level of protection. And so it may be at some point in time a little similar where in my field that we've done a lot of education internal to make sure everyone understands the AI we're working on, or the neural networks and how they work, how they could be used. It's going to be something similar to, they need to understand whether if they're working in automotive, or whether they're working in, controls or wherever, that they may need to understand a little bit more about how the cybersecurity is going to interact with that controller or that processor, and also with the AI, and also with the 5G, and also, so it's kind of all these disciplines, they still have to learn at a certain level, like a minimum level, like your engineers. So that while they understand how the nuts and bolts work, and they understand how, the switching goes on, they also understand how it interacts with the rest of the world. That's what I see my future goals. So right now, I'm kind of making sure everyone understands as a new AI comes out, we get a new technology in a case, that I teach everyone, or I make sure everyone gets up to speed, and that we can handle the work that we're working on, and we can do more. It's also something that I have to think about like that, where as I see cybersecurity, or if we start focusing more on IoT, that I think that's a bigger issue for us. Maybe in the U.S. sometimes is can a company overseas use that device without our control? And so it's an interesting perspective where it's an engineering almost inventor level, but it's more of an engineer level that I deal with.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great set of recommendation. So as I was reflecting on this question, I thought, what is there's two things going on, right? One, now we are in a mode where in the past you graduated from college, you learned what you did and you applied that, right? Now these days, you've sort of migrated to this continuous learning concept where the idea is that you want to really make half an hour available for yourself almost every day to be able to pick up something new, because things are coming at you with such a fast pace like you described, right? Whether it's
about
5G
the average
or
oversight,
IoT.
by the way, about a half hour per user. So
okay. So that's
learning.
So that's kind of what we encourage also, that because you could certainly say spend a couple hours on a Friday, but sometimes it's hard to learn all in one go. So instead of taking 1 week complete learning and then nothing for 51 weeks, you're better off doing a little bit every day so you kind of keep up to what your passion is. What we did with our engineers is I thought about this problem very deeply, and because there's so many things they could learn. And I said, there were 5 disciplines that we picked that we took everybody through about a 3-year. In each of them, we took them through a 3-year learning track. And those were, because the world is a cloud-first, data-first world. So we wanted everybody, no matter whether they were working in security or in building a healthcare application or something else, we wanted them to first learn a little bit about cloud, because we thought all applications will eventually have to deal with cloud. We wanted them to learn a little bit about AI, not to become an expert at it, but to be able to spot the right use cases and to be able to have the right conversation with the data scientist. Then we thought about that any application will have a front end and a back end. So we wanted them to learn about modern UI UX. So that way they get the experience for the end user is compelling, because if the experience is not great, nobody will use that software. And we wanted them to learn a little bit about microservices, because microservices is the new way that things can be very scalable, reusable. That way you can build things once and use it many, many times. They become like Lego blocks instead of everybody building their own thing. So we see a lot of reusability. So that's how I would approach it, to say, develop a set of foundational capabilities, and then depending upon your area, you can specialize in 1 or 2 things.
Gotcha.
And I think it's also something like, in our field, it's like most of the people that go into a patent field come from a certain, whether it's electrical or chemical or civil or mechanical, and they expect to work in those type of fields. And so sometimes it's actually getting people out of their comfort zone to understand, to learn something that they aren't used to. And so it may be that some people, yes, they can't pick up the math. And so if you get them a difficult paper, they may not be able to really dig into it. But it's one of the things that we have to kind of get people that are not disciplined in the field to all of a sudden understand it's something that is substantially different than what they've ever dealt with. So it may be that if they're dealing with automatic transmissions, they're not expecting some AI controller. And so, but you kind of have to, slowly encourage them how it's not that difficult.
Yeah, it's almost like you have to teach them, instead of a content, you have to teach them the art of learning.
Yeah.
Right. That itself is probably the most important.
It's almost, actually, it's like elementary school
skill
sometimes.
now.
Because there's some videos you can sit there on YouTube and you get to watch the bouncing ball, tell you how the neural network works, and how the back propagation goes on. It's kind of funny.
I've seen the similar type of ones for blockchain. These ball videos are very popular.
It's all of a sudden the math comes out, and you're like,
there you go.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, guys. I really appreciate you coming today. Any last words for our audience?
No, I think I would just leave people with one thought, which is, I think we live in amazing times. I am going to actually leave us on a note of optimism. We live in amazing times where technology, I think, is leveling the playing field. It's giving us incredible types of immersive experiences to play with. It's giving us more innovation than we've ever seen before. And so my message would be to really embrace it head on, right? We could be afraid of technology, or we can sort of join it and learn some of the skills and take advantage of it, and actually that way make life more interesting. And so I see the glass more half full.
Yeah, and I think I try to always get people to think about, find something that you love. And it's kind of more like, even if you're working on something, I work on some stuff that is so mind-numbing. But I'm loving the fact that I've solved a problem, or that I can succeed in understanding something and explain, and I can argue something stronger. But it's kind of find something in this. And I think in all these various technologies, there's so much technology, so much new stuff. There's so much to be so interested in, that I wouldn't be afraid of anything. I would keep yourself, options open and find something that really interests you, and you'll be amazed like how well you'll do at it.
Fantastic advice. Really appreciate you joining today.
Thank you, Leif.
Thank you.